Hello. Today I would like to discuss with you the second movement of the very last of Beethoven Sonata, the Opus 111. I want to discuss this one specifically because it is perhaps the one which creates the most problems for the interpreter. It happens also to be one of the most sublime piece of music I think ever written for the piano. But it comes loaded with problems which once again in Beethoven do not have clear solutions. And I would like to talk about different possible approaches, not only different ways of doing it, but different almost philosophical approach to a musical text. And what I would like to highlight here is really the difference between the music as written on the page and as thought and conceived by a composer, and the realization of this music into sound, which is quite a different thing sometimes. I talked to a composer friend of mine recently who told me something that I've always kept. He told me, well, I don't know what this piece of music of mine is because I've never heard it yet. And what he means by that is, although he has a conceptual idea of what his piece should sound like, as long as it hasn't been performed, part of the piece hasn't been alive yet, and there is a part that he himself, the composer, doesn't know. And I think that applies to all music. And although this might be a controversial thing to say, the fact that Beethoven was very largely deaf by the time he composed his last work mean that on certain level the music for him was still a theoretical way. He could never have heard it like you and me have heard it. And as such, there are things about his music that he will never have known. So what I want to talk, and it's not a surprise, again, it's about tempo. Specifically because this piece, as we know, is a theme and variation. And Beethoven has taken great care to write, every time there is a change of meter, the stesso tempo, the same tempo. He seems to highlight the fact that this whole movement is one unit. He has not separated the variations. They all run through it. It looks on the page like one piece. Whenever there is a change of meter, he writes the stesso tempo. So we are led to assume that there is a tempo that works for the whole of the piece. And it looks wonderful on the page. What happens, as everybody who has spent even 2 minutes with the piece will know, is that the note value diminishes by 2 with each variation. It's a very baroque technique in some ways. And so you get a sort of gradual shortening, which feels like an acceleration, a wild acceleration. The pulse remains, or at least should remain, exactly the same all the way through. It's just that he crams more and more notes, so that by variation 3, you are actually playing very fast. And yet the tempo is still adagio, but it's just that you are dealing with hemi, demi, semiquaver, and demi, hemi, demi, semiquavers. So of course, the speed is going to be fast because the note values are so short. I've spent many years trying to find a unified tempo for this piece, and I'll be honest, I never succeeded. And taking aside Wim Winters, I have not heard anyone else succeeding. But I've heard people trying, if you want. It's interesting to know what are the historical tempi for the piece, and it no longer really comes as a surprise to me, but it is surprising when one puts the metronome that Czerny and Moschles have in mind for this music. It is definitely much faster than what we modern interpreters would do. They run something like that. It's around 60, 63, something like that. So it is faster than most people would play it today. It has the good quality, which is shared by a lot of the metronome marks of this period, of being completely natural. It feels, in some ways, it feels the right thing, the right speed, the speed at which, if you don't think twice about the music, yes, of course you play it like this. It's interesting to see that historically it has been slowed down quite a bit. Hans van Bülow already is quite a lot slower. I think he's 48, and I think Schnabel is even a bit slower. And modern interpreters sometimes go for speeds that are, I wouldn't say half of that value, but yes, definitely very slow. The fact is that in the 20th century we had influence mainly coming, I would say, from the East, that have given us a different perception of, or a possible different perception of time. The statism has entered our perception with Messiaen, with the minimalist, with Morton Feldman, people like this. And we have learned to appreciate the timeless in music. And I think Beethoven didn't know that. But when we do things like we give an interesting quality to the music. In some ways it is a distortion. At least I believe it is a distortion. I imagine that Beethoven wanted it quite a bit faster than that. As the molto semplice, very simple, suggests. This is not very simple. It gives a more mystical quality to the music. And it is definitely a valid interpretative option within certain bounds, I think. It is possible to go there and give a completely compelling rendition of that theme. I can play a bit of the second half and I can like it very much. It's maybe not necessarily how I want to play it, but I can like it very much. Now the point I really want to make is that whichever speed you are going to choose, somewhere down the line you are going to have problems and you are going to find it's almost impossible to match. I'll show you. The problem of all the people who take that speed, and there are many, is actually comes early on. It comes with the first variation. It's almost impossible to defend at that speed. The only one that I know who tries to stick to it is Trifonov, and despite all the immense admiration and love I have for him, I think he's misguided there, because you can't really seems to downright reject this approach, and it doesn't get much better with the second variation, which would run something like doesn't work. It drags along, and if you are really intent on sticking to that, the only moment it starts to work actually is your third variation, which is going to run something like that. possible. No problem with that. And if you carry on with that, then you can make this work. It is slow, but once again you will enter a different time scale where it's perfectly possible to shape and then the music tolerates this speed pretty well. Then we get on a tangent, and the last two real variations again will not work, because you will have that an essential quality of the music has gone, and it is impossible to phrase the very last one with a trill. The atmosphere is nice at the cost of a perception of the phrase, of the musical phrase as a whole. So the fact that this speed is almost certainly not historical. I mean, we do not have Beethoven on the metronome marking, but we do have the metronome marking of people who've known him fairly well, and they suggest something completely different. And the fact that so many of the variations do not work, it makes us want, well, why don't we try what actually Moschles and Czerny wrote and do something faster? And for a while it served us well, so that's perfect. Also perfect. And then it seems like we're on a winning road there. The problems arrive next. It is, I will not do a Wim Winters and say this is unplayable. Of course it is playable, but it feels definitely rushed. Playable, would I want to play it at that speed? No, not really. Then, if we move on, something like that. It works. It rushes me a little bit, but it works. Same thing, it rushes me a little bit, but you can see that it is possible. My problem, my biggest problem will come here when we arrive. Here I do feel the almost nirvana state that you are achieving when you reach that. I feel that doesn't come across very well. It feels definitely rushed for... but it feels very comfortable for... very often here we have that syndrome where we just feel the notes of the melody are just pillars with nothing in between, and it doesn't feel like the musical phrase. At this speed it absolutely does, and it has this sense of forward motion that the music seems to really want. For the last variation, it's a little more complicated. Of course it will be phrased. Yeah, it's possible, but it's not musically meaningful terribly to have reached this incredibly delicate, otherworldly sort of music, and to have it dispatched with this haste. So we have two, once we have reached this conclusion, we have two possible roads we can take. You have the one I would describe as the fundamentalist, sticking to what we believe is, okay, Beethoven writes listless a tempo, this is an adagio, we need to find a speed that works, and trying all the in between, and some variations will be a bit too slow and some will be a bit too fast, and or you can accept that actually to keep the music alive and to give each variation its due and to enable them to be the best they can be, you have to be actually flexible and function with your heart of musician and with the acoustic of the music, rather than with the pre-existing formula that doesn't, well, that serves your brain very well, but that doesn't serve the music so well. And then here is what would happen. Something a bit slower than what either Czerny or much less recommend, because we have the feedback of 2 centuries. We know the extreme depth that this music evokes. Again, we have that different perception of time brought to us by many contemporary musicians. And it feels like a sense of the timeless is needed in that movement, in that theme, to be fully effective. But then I already know that if I stick to this tempo for the first version, it will be a bit too slow. I do not want it. So I will have to be flexible and to find a way to smoothly move from one speed to the next. This first variation is really in some ways I hate that word because it's been hackneyed, but that's the only word I can use, the beginning of a journey. From that moment of total stillness, there is a sense that we are getting in motion. And you reach the... At this speed I feel perfectly comfortable, and then I move. And again, here I feel very comfortable. The most awkward moment is the transition from the second to the third variation. And so on. And here what happens is, although it feels I'm playing much faster, my actual pulse has slowed down quite a bit actually. And I'm not keeping to the proportions that Beethoven indicates. But it does seem to me the best way to make the music come across, again, in a sonic way, not as note on the page. The theory, I think, cannot be adequately translated into sound. And I think that's an important element. And if I carry on and I try to find the speed I want, there is a really difficult transition to manage at the end of the because the characters of the two variations are so completely different. One needs a huge amount of time to go from one to another. Now for me this variation evokes purgatory. This sort of place of transition which is neither painful nor bliss. You can see that it's also a place of suffering, but it's really almost a no man's land, and there is no dynamic. You don't follow the shade of the phrase, which each chord is just as grey as the one before, and that's really how I envisage it. I actually want to speed up a tiny bit for the, it's not even the next variation, it's the repeat. Because it's so much more luminous, I think it needs a slightly faster speed. The difference in registers does that, and then you get back to the depths, and this time you really have groans. And again, this needs time to be expressed. And then I think we need to lose a bit of speed every time it goes up. Until we reach this, which is, I think, a cutting point in the movement. This is the first time we reach heaven, in fact. At least we get a glimpse. Though it doesn't last very long. And then, when we reach this transition after the trill section, which is quite free, when we reach this wonderful again, that demands time, but then we have to negotiate a transition. Speed. This is really the first time the theme comes back reinstated in its original form, all bytes, ornamented. And I think that the speed should be a little faster than the beginning still. But then we reach that ecstatic culmination and the trill. That's a difficult one. Because we have to find a speed that is slow enough to be ecstatic, and yet where the sense of the phrase doesn't disappear. Out of tempo. And I think trying not to make a fuss. Not to make a fuss of the end, trying not to slow down too much those last 3 bars, seems to me to be terribly important. So this is a little bit rambling, but I simply try to express what I feel as an interpreter is we have to be careful we are not bound so rigidly to the printed text that our brain goes before our hearts and ears as musicians. I hope you understand, or I hope I've been clear enough that you can understand some of what I've tried to convey. And as always, I'd be happy if you have opinions that either agree or differ with mine. I'd be happy to hear about it. Thank you very much.